Good afternoon, evening. It's Wednesday, not that it really matters. In this slides, we're going to go through China from the 1800s up to modern China. So I'm going to go over the first 2 pages of notes, and this is the highlights of what I think of when I go back to 1840 and bring China up to today. I've separated it and simplified it into different phases of the country's history. All right, let me take you through this. So, in the 1840 through the early 1900s, okay, this is a period where China was still ruled by an emperor and empress, but China was influenced by foreigners. The West and other countries, including Japan, had advanced technologically, and China had not. So, this was a time of imperialism, and China was one of the countries on the list to be imperialized. So, we see that England goes to war with China over the Opium War. China loses, and Great Britain gets Hong Kong, and they also get a sphere of influence in China, extraterritorial rights where Chinese law doesn't apply to their merchants. And this begins multiple wars where China will be divided up to five different countries will have spheres in China. The United States enacts an open door policy, convincing other countries to keep China free politically and open economically to the world. So China has never taken over politically, but they are in negative trade situations with multiple countries around the world. We see from earlier in the year, this is the last Empress Cixi, and the nationalism of China at the end of the century starts boiling over, and China starts to become more nationalistic and wants to reject foreigners in the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion fails, but the spirit and the idea lives on, which brings me to the next phase, about 15 to 20 years, is national unity and shall we say, dynasty. New governments were going to be formed that don't go with the emperor. Sun Yat-sen, often referred to as the father of modern China, leads an anti-dynasty, anti-emperor new government, a nationalist party. There's also a new budding communist party that wants powers. There's also local warlords, and there's generals. And China is not unified, but they do end up working together for the most part, establishing a non-emperor government of China. And then the two largest factions, the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party, they start going to, well, it was a civil war, and it really was, I can't say it's a communist revolution. It is a communist revolution, but the Nationalist Party wasn't very established in the first place, so it's really just two competing factions that were there from the beginning of the 1920s, trying to get power. So they get into a civil war, which spills through World War II, and it's back and forth. The communists were at one point almost totally lost. They had to flee for I think almost a year, where they went on a multi-thousand-mile journey of the Long March, and their numbers were reduced by 90%, so the communists almost lose. But Japan is starting World War II, so Japan invades Manchuria area and then main China area. Japan does the Rape of Nanking, and through all of World War II, Japan and China fight. The communists and nationalists fight against the Japanese. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. But the war ends, and they go back to the Civil War, which will last for another 4 or 5 years. And in the end, the communists win mainland China and call themselves the People's Republic of China. If anything is ever called the People's Republic, it's typically communist. And the nationalists, the anti-communists, flee to Taiwan, taking a lot of wealth from China, and they call themselves, even to today, the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan. We get into a almost 30-year rule by the leader of the communists, the leader of the Communist Revolution, Mao Zedong, becomes a sole, even though there's a Communist Party, he is the leader. He is the sole power in China, much more like a Lenin or a Stalin. with the Communist Party, and much less like the other communist leaders that came after him. And no one's taking out Mao. He is, for as long as he was alive till he died, he was the sole power, even though the only government was the communist, even the only party was communist, he was still the ruler. Much more like the Kim family in North Korea. And one of the first things they do is take over Tibet, the country of Tibet. Tibet has not been free. They have been a part of China since the early 50s. The Shaolin Buddhists were persecuted, as seen as anti-compatible with communism at this point. Mao institutes his version of what society should be, doing the Great Leap Forward, which are 5-year plans in which he collectivizes the agriculture, Joseph Stalin style, people living on huge agricultural village communes. He institutes industrial forward progress, railroads, steel production, trying to bring China into the modern era with dubious success. It actually leads to one of the worst periods of Chinese history, mass starvation, where the policies enacted by basically Mao Zedong and the communist leaders lead to mass starvation of the people. So unpopular was this rule that Mao loses some power, but he reinstitutes communism through a second revolution, the Cultural Revolution, where Mao's a bit older at this point. He energizes the youth in another communist revolution and retakes power. Always when you think of Mao and his rule, especially the Cultural Revolution, you think of Mao's Little Red Book, quotations from the chairman Mao on just things he has said, recorded in a little book, on revolution, on China, on the economy, on the world, sayings of Mao Zedong. Two other big points in Mao's rule is they do open up with the United States. And at the end of Mao's rule, they break with the Soviet Union, so China is less friends with the USSR towards the end of the Cold War and more friends with the United States. And that started with ping-pong diplomacy That started with ping-pong diplomacy and the countries getting together over sports, and eventually President Nixon from the United States goes to China and ushers in a new, not necessarily friendship, but an easing of tensions and the foundation for the United States and China working together in the future. Mao dies in 1976, and within a couple years, Deng Xiaoping, spelled incorrectly, Deng Xiaoping, is the new communist president. He is not an absolute ruler such as Mao, but he does have a lot of power and a lot of support, and he changes over the economy of China. It is painfully obvious to anyone who is looking that a full communist central command economy is not productive, and Deng Xiaoping introduces a mixed economy where it's much more open. The communist government controls major sectors of the economy. The major sector is controlled, but other parts of the economy are open to capitalism, open to the free market, open to the incentive of profit, to bring down prices through competition, and to increase innovation by the hopes of being able to sell something and invent something to be sold. He institutes the 4 modernizations to bring China in the 70s into the world. Pause. So we see Deng Xiaoping trying to get China into the modern era with his 4 modernizations. We had a redo of agriculture. We can check the date where the communes were dismantled. Pause. Communes gradually dismantled after 1979, so he's revolutionizing the agriculture, bringing it up, revolutionizing industry, getting world-style factories and urbanization in the cities. Looking to the rest of the world for science and technology, and finally modernizing the Chinese army, their military for national defense. Okay. Once again, we get the government is mostly in control of the economy, directing it, but there is a bit of open economy, which is going to keep growing up until what it is today. In the 1980s, China is faced with an overpopulation problem. They were over 1 billion people. They just couldn't allow their population to double. if you're like 500 million people, you could double to 1 billion, but once you start reaching 1 billion, there's no country in the world that can double from 1 billion to 2 billion. And even if you could possibly get by with 2 billion, you couldn't double after that to 4 billion, okay? And so they instituted a one baby policy. You can research that as one of your things. It's real quickly, it was to praise one baby. Government subsidies for one baby. 2 babies is shunned, and doesn't receive government aid for 2 babies. Stay at 1 baby. In the late 1980s, 1989, we get a human rights violation. The people were wondering, can they have some freedom? It is a communist government that restricts political freedom, and you're getting communist freedom starting across Eastern Europe in the satellite nations in the USSR. The people of China were said, hey, maybe we want some of this freedom too. And the government put down the protest with a massacre in the Tiananmen Square. And they did it in a way where no one was left to wonder what the government stance was on political freedom. And from 1989 till today, no. If the Chinese government doesn't want you to have political freedom, you don't have political freedom. Economic freedom? Yes. Political freedom? Not so much. Okay, from the 2000s until current, the island of Hong Kong in 1997, I believe, was returned to China. It is unified, but 2 different systems. Hong Kong can run their own system for 50 years, although there is conflict between China's rules and the desires of the Hong Kong. There has been protests in Hong Kong due to China trying to implement some of the wanted China's rules, and there has been protests in Hong Kong, something you could look into. The Communist Party is the one party. You can join the Communist Party. It is a job. It is a job for those who want to be in politics, but it's also, you can be in your other jobs but be members of the Communist Party too. It's a typical Communist Party. You get better stuff when you're part of the party. You get better jobs when you're part of the party. You have to support the party, and only those in the party can vote for who's going to be running and leading politics, right? Local elections, only those in the party can vote for the party leaders, and then the people in the party vote. The towns vote for the town leaders, then towns get together for the governor leader, then the mayors get together for the governors get together and vote, so it's all one party. State-controlled economy still, with areas of free market capitalism. There is a lot more free market capitalism in the last few years. If you go to a downtown city in China, you will not tell the difference between capitalism, China's city, and capitalism city in any other capitalist country. Okay, it is restaurants, shops, all running free market style, but the government is still in control of the economy, the major parts. China today is the world's factory, okay? Even though they're less making clothes, other countries are doing it cheaper now than China. China is still making some clothes. Anything that can be plastic or electronic can be made in China. Multinational corporations put their assembly factories in China. Okay, so you get refrigerators and air conditioners and sneakers are all assembled. iPhones assembled in China, even though it's not a Chinese, it's Apple. The Apple company owns and runs the factory in China, okay, multinational, but then there's Chinese factories that produce Chinese goods and then sell them all over the world too, so there's both. China's the second largest economy in the world. They're quite frankly doing so well right now with money. They've instituted a 2-baby policy just to make sure their population doesn't go negative. They have to continue to grow slowly, so now they're on a 2-baby policy. All this industry and growth comes with the negative effects of pollution in the cities. China is a nuclear power with nuclear weapons. They are trying to expand into the South China Sea, making artificial islands and claiming sea rights. A very interesting thing you can look into. Recently, there is a new middle class giving to massive Chinese tourism around the world. Any major hotspot in Europe, or different places in the world, you can see within the last 5 and 10 years, a new cohort of middle-class Chinese tourists, where 20, 30 years ago there wasn't. The government is changing. They're still communist, but the new president has just removed term limits. So we are looking at a president for life or until he wants to resign. This is a very big change in the government of China. It is still a one-party control with a president for life, and there is no guarantee of human rights. So what the government wants, the government can get. So that's why we talk about human rights in China, because some of the decisions the government makes would be not legal in different other countries because the governments don't have that much power. A couple new things. We have a social credit score. That's something new. Where you can, if you choose to look it up, the Chinese government is actually monitoring what you do, how you move, what you buy, if you litter, and they actually, through a whole system of phone tracking and cameras in the cities and the villages, and you are actually given a score on how social you are and how good you are for the community. China is having massive, in the last 8 years, urban economic growth. There's a housing market in the cities. Everything is just build right now. And you could look up how China treats religious minorities, like the minority Muslim Uyghurs in the West. There are right now camps to re-educate that population to conform more with the Chinese view of society. And some are saying that is definitely a human rights violation. All right, that ends the video on the notes.